Picture the scene. You walk past a public vending machine full of ice-cold drinks. Perhaps the weather is warm and your thirst is palpable. You slot your money into the machine, and when the bottle falls to the bottom, you find another drink that has been left behind in the dispensing slot. Maybe you find a drink abandoned on top of the machine, meaning you don't even need to spend money to quench your thirst. Would you take the drink? Most people would likely say no. After all, you don't know why it's there and who's touched it already. But across Japan in 1985, 12 people all faced this same scenario. And all 12 fatefully decided to accept the abandoned drinks. What they didn't know was that these drinks had been laced with a toxic herbicide known as Paraquat. The culprit, a serial murderer dubbed the vending machine killer, whose identity has remained elusive ever since. The deadly toxin of choice. As mentioned, all of the tainted beverages that the 12 known victims consumed were poisoned with Paraquat. This herbicide has incredible efficacy in destroying plant life and eradicating unwanted garden weeds. Law enforcement officials use it to kill marijuana plants. Budding gardeners would use it to remove the knotweeds in their soil. Whomever uses it, and for whatever reason, its toxicity always poses a threat. A splash on an open wound or the ingestion of a slight sip can and will cause miserable effects, beginning with acute nausea and then progressing to lung congestion and death. There is no antidote at hand. It is for these reasons that Paraquat is always handled with the utmost care. Unfortunately, the 12 victims who died in 1985 had no idea the drinks they thought were lucky discoveries were primed to end their life. You may be wondering why so many people would willingly consume an abandoned drink left behind at a vending machine. It is absolutely a valid question. But there are contextual reasons why so many people chose to do this. At the time of the murders, there was an ongoing marketing campaign for a new vitamin-enriched drink called Orinamen C. Some lucky customers who purchased a drink from the machines would randomly receive a free bottle of Orinamen C. Most of the poisoned drinks were Orinamen C beverages, but a few were not. As well as the marketing campaign, a pay it forward culture was present at the time. It was not unusual for kind-hearted people to purchase 2 drinks and leave one behind for somebody to enjoy later at no cost. With this in mind, it perhaps becomes less surprising that 12 distinct people chose to consume the drinks they found. Sadly, the killer was also aware of this and leveraged it to their advantage. The timeline of the 12 murders. The 12 deaths all took place in 1985 and were spread across Japan. I have made what I hope to be a close estimate of these locations based on known information and plotted them on a map for visual reference. The vending machine killer first struck in April 1985 in Fukuyama, Hiroshima. A 45-year-old truck driver who was purchasing a drink at the machine discovered a bottle of Orinamen C laying on top of the machine. After promptly consuming the drink, the man died on the 2nd of May. The forensic examination discovered traces of Paraquat in the man's vomit. But at this stage, there was nothing to suggest deliberate poisoning. Indeed, there were no more cases of Paraquat poisoning for several months. To all concerned, this poor man's death had been an isolated incident. But when September arrived, those notions were quickly dismissed. Over the course of the month, a further 5 people fell victim to poisoned beverages. On the 11th, a 52-year-old man who was returning from a fishing trip purchased a bottle of Orinamen C at a vending machine in Izumisano. When the bottle fell, he discovered another Orinamen-C drink that had been left behind. Both were consumed at home, leading to the man's death 3 days later. On the 12th, merely a day after the previous victim found the drink, a 22-year-old university student in Matsusaka bought a real gold drink from a machine, a popular Japanese drink produced by the Coca-Cola Company. An additional bottle of real gold was left in the dispensing slot that was poisoned with paraquat. The man died 2 days later. But after remnants of the drink were tested, the offending poison was found to be diquat, another toxic herbicide. This was the first and only case where an alternative chemical was used. And it will lead to a point of contention that will be discussed later on. 3 more victims sadly lost their life in September. On the 19th, a 30-year-old man in Akaizen discovered a cola drink beneath a vending machine. He subsequently fell ill and attended the hospital but died on the 22nd. The 5th victim, a 45-year-old man in Miyakanojo, found 2 real gold drinks abandoned in the dispensing slot and died on the 22nd after drinking both. The final victim in September, a 50-year-old man from Habakino, consumed 2 Orinamen-C drinks that he discovered sitting in a machine dispensing slot. As expected, he sadly died on the 7th of October after his health rapidly deteriorated. The killer's spree showed no signs of abating in October. 4 more people died as a result of paraquat poisoning. The first, a 44-year-old man from Kanosu, found 2 Orinamen-C drinks left behind in the dispensing slot and died after consuming both. A week later, on the 15th of October, a 69-year-old man in Kashihara died after consuming 2 poisoned drinks in a machine. A 55-year-old man in Miyagi died a week later after also ingesting a poisoned drink from a machine. At the end of October, in Saitama, a 50-year-old man consumed an Orinamen-C drink he found in the dispenser. He died shortly afterwards. The vending machine killer's spree concluded in November 1985. But not before 2 more victims were killed. A 42-year-old man in Saitama found 2 Orinamen-C drinks and died after drinking both. The final victim, a 17-year-old girl from the Kadama district, took a second cola drink alongside the one she purchased and died a week later. She was the only female victim of the 12 known to have died during this time. But whether that was mere chance or by design is unknown. After the final death in November 1985, and 30 other people reportedly left in dire health due to the poisoned drinks, action was taken to prevent further deaths. Warning stickers were placed at all vending machines across the country telling people not to consume abandoned drinks. The company that manufactured the Orinamen-C drinks, Otsuka Pharmaceutical Company, also changed the design of the bottle caps from screw-top to a pull tab. It is unclear whether the killer ceased their actions or if the warnings had an effect. But the outcome was the same. The killings came to an abrupt end in November 1985. The difficult investigation. The Japanese police investigated the Paraquat murders thoroughly and extensively, but they were hindered throughout. All but one of the aforementioned deaths were definitively caused by paraquat poisoning, as traces were found either in remnants of the drinks or in vomit deposits. The one exception, the drink poisoned with diquat, was ultimately attributed to the killer, but it has also been suggested to have possibly been committed by a copycat killer. The veracity of this is unknown. Also, All of the victims except for the last one were male. Though whether this had any investigative relevance is not certain. But the true difficulty lay in the total lack of evidence left behind. The drinks were deposited at machines with little foot traffic. No cameras in observation. And no eyewitnesses present. Forensic DNA testing yielded no information about the killer. With no evidence at hand, detectives examined the victims themselves to uncover any possible connection between them. It did not take long for the truth to emerge. The killings had been indiscriminate and random. And there was absolutely nothing linking one to another. With no way of uncovering the killer's identity, the police could only aim to prevent as many subsequent deaths as possible. They distributed warning leaflets in various places. They also asked drug stores and other retailers who stocked Paraquat supplies to clamp down on purchases and to keep up-to-date records of anyone who did buy the chemical. But once the killings ceased after the final death in November, the case went cold almost overnight. The identity of the vending machine killer, or any information about them at all, has remained unknown ever since. A possible theory. With the overwhelming lack of evidence in this case, it is somewhat difficult to formulate any theories as to who the killer was or why they indiscriminately targeted such an array of people. However, there has nonetheless been speculation about the case. Namely, some believe that the vending machine killer may have been connected to another serial poisoner who ravished Japan's food production industry in 1984. Only a year before these killings, the monster with 21 faces sent Japanese food manufacturers into a tailspin when they claimed to have laced various candies with cyanide. The public panic went into overdrive, resulting in the manufacturer of the candy withholding it from the shelves. Speculation has suggested that the group responsible for the 1984 furore may have been the same as in the Paraquat murders. However, there is one clear difference. Nobody was killed in the 1984 events. The monster with 21 faces also frequently left notes for the police. The vending machine killer, in contrast, operated entirely in the shadows. Two serial poisoning events happening so close to each other are bound to attract attention. But the connection seems to end there. Far more plausibly is the possibility that investigative attention was directed on the 1984 case, leaving fewer resources available for uncovering the identity of the vending machine killer. You will also recall from earlier that all but one of the killer's 12 victims were male. There has been speculation that this was not happenstance but by design. Could the killer have been female and deliberately targeting male victims? The Orinamen C drink was predominantly focused on male consumers, and some of the vending machines were said to have been in areas with more male foot traffic. The plausibility of this theory seems strong until you consider its inherent flaw. There was no conceivable way for the killer to guarantee that a male customer would consume the poisoned drink. Women also used the vending machines, as evident by the final victim being a woman. There is nothing to suggest the killer remained on site to guarantee a specific victim profile. But the pattern is still curious to consider, and not one that should be immediately ignored despite its issues. There is also the possibility that the killer may have taken issue with the Orinamen C drinks being marketed as healthy beverages and poisoned them as a way of altering public perception of their benefits. With the monster with 21 faces dominating the headlines the year before, could the vending machine killer have taken inspiration from their methodology? As I previously said, Two serial poisoning events happening so close to each other is a statistical curiosity. But in the absence of evidence, this is nothing more than speculation. Plus, Oranamen C was not the only brand of drink poisoned. In some cases, real gold bottles had been tainted with Paraquat. The choice of the brand may have been relevant or it may not. Sadly, it does not seem likely that we will find out. Almost 40 years have passed since the vending machine killer stole 12 people's lives across Japan. Their indiscriminate method of killing makes it unlikely that we will ever find out who they were, or what their motivations were. The case quickly went cold back in 1985, and Japanese law has a statute of limitations for poisoning cases. This expired back in 2000. The case is no longer active. But the 12 people who lost their lives deserve justice. Perhaps at some point, through some mechanism presently unknown, we will find out the identity of this elusive killer. Critical questions. There is a distinct lack of information available in this case, which leaves the door wide open for speculation. As always, there are several questions that I, personally, would love to have answered. I've summarized these below, but I'm sure you have your own. Was the killer a woman as speculated? The methodology and the ostensible focus on male victims have introduced the possibility. But I'm less sure. Oranamen C was also said to be a drink mostly consumed by men. I'm not sure I subscribe to this theory. And I mainly believe the victims were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it is a curious possibility nevertheless. Were the killings linked to or inspired by the monster with 21 faces in 1984? I don't think they were linked. But there is certainly an argument to be made that the vending machine killer may have taken inspiration from the 1984 perpetrators. Two serial poisoning cases a year apart in the same location is an oddity that I cannot ignore. Why is there such a long gap between the first killing and the second? The gap was not small. 5 months passed between the initial poisoning in April and the subsequent spree in September. Had the killer conducted a trial run to examine the effectiveness of their methodology? That seems most likely. But could there have been another reason for the hiatus? Why did the killings suddenly stop in November? Had the warning labels on the machines had such a positive effect? But with their methodology proven to be effective and their identity still shrouded, it seems odd that the killer would spontaneously stop. There has been speculation that the killer may have left the area or that something happened to them. But it is not known. The most likely scenario is that the change in bottle design physically prevented them from poisoning the drinks. Pull tabs would have made tampering far easier to detect and a consumer less likely to drink. But could there have been something else that happened to end their spree? Links. New York Times. Medium. UPI.